Blog Talk Radio.
Om Shabbat Shalom, Holy Way of the Most High. Om Shabbat Shalom, I sense your presence. Om Shabbat Shalom, Holy Way of the Most High. Om Shabbat Shalom, I sense your presence. And I am the light within your soul. In the essence of truth and right, love makes the circle whole. And here we stand in line, waiting for some sacred sign. But to find the balance is the purpose of this time. To restore the balance of the universal mind. And in the presence of my Lord of light and love, everything I see aspiring to be free. And when I call to thee, and come on bended knee, surrender to the all-pervading light and love. Reflections of the one surrounding me with love. And I sense your presence. I sense your presence. I sense your presence. I sense your presence. Within and without, above and below, yeah. East, west, north and south, I sense your presence. Without and within, below and above, yeah. East, west, north and south, I sense your presence. I sense your presence. Presence of my Lord of light and love, everything I find in tune with the divine. And here we stand in line, waiting for some sacred sign. But to find the balance is the purpose of this time. To restore the balance of the universal mind. And I am the light within your soul. In the essence of truth and right, love makes the circle whole. And when I call to thee, and come on bended knee, surrender to the all-pervading light and love. Reflections of the one surrounding me with love. For to find the balance is the purpose of this time. To restore the balance of the universal mind. And I sense your presence. I sense your presence. I sense your presence. I sense your presence. Om Shabbat Shalom, Holy Way of the Most High. Om Shabbat Shalom, I sense your presence. Om Shabbat Shalom, Holy Way of the Most High. Om Shabbat Shalom, I sense your presence. Om Shabbat Shalom, Holy Way of the Most High. Om Shabbat Shabbat Shalom, Holy Angel of the Most High. Om Shabbat Shalom, I sense your presence. I sense your presence.
Thank you for joining me tonight here on Activating Compassion in the Midnight Hour. My name is Jessie Ann Nichols George, and I am your hostess. The music you were listening to at the beginning of the show is I Sense Your Presence. It's by Shem Shai. And I just want to extend a welcome, whether you are here for the first time or whether you're joining us because you've listened to the show before and have enjoyed listening to the different guests and topics that we've had along the way. Here at Activating Compassion in the Midnight Hour, I look at the different ways that compassion exists in our lives, how to remove our blocks, resistances, frustrations, and more. Some weeks I will be discussing different aspects on how compassion is in our life, how it affects our life, and the different areas of compassion. Then some weeks I'm doing more exercises and practical implementations. Most of the time this year I've got guests on the show, which I've got a fantastic lineup of guests. I'm so very, very blessed with the people I have on this year. And then also, I've got different musical artists that come on along the way. We had Stephen Halpern on earlier this year, Jill Matson. At the end of very last year, we had Claire Hadeen. Coming up this summer in a few weeks, we've got Peter Cater, who's been nominated for 7 Grammys for Best New Age Artist in the last 8 years. So that's going to be an exciting guest as well. And then, every now and then I throw in just a mixture night of different things. So it's great to have you join us and participate in this. In my own work, what I do is I focus on helping people find and use compassion in their everyday lives. I've created the Genesis Clearing Statement, which some of you have experienced on previous shows, and if you've missed that, you can go back and catch it in our archives. For example, last fall, when I was actually on Kevin's show and stuff, he interviewed me and we went through the Genesis Clearing Statement on that show, so that's a great archive to listen to. In addition to that, I've authored 2 books titled Activating Compassion and Activating Compassion, the Workbook. I'm soon going to be releasing my next set of books, which is based on relationships, and basically the books are done by just working through some of the publishing process right now with it. And in addition to that, I've created the Compassion Tour, which is a multi-state nationwide tour. It includes workshops, retreats, seminars, book signings, and fundraising events. And I'm already working on creating a tour for 2013. There's currently plans to go up into the Vancouver area on this one. It's also going to include speaking at the Matriarch Gathering, which is going to be in the Durango, Colorado area the first weekend of October. So that's going to be a very exciting event if any of you are available and would like to attend. I know the first day is women only, but I believe they're letting men in on the second day. So it should be a really great weekend to attend if you have that opportunity. And then you can follow all the events on the Compassion Tour as well as other events I have going on at jessieannnicholsgeorge.eventbrite.com. And there's also an option there for gifting the tour as well. So that's a great option for people that maybe can't attend, but they want to support the work that I'm doing and help me get out to some of the fundraising events and things like that as well. That option is there. And you're going to find actually there are events going on every weekend right now through the end of August that I've got booked. So quite a bit of a lineup ready to go. And just a reminder, if you enjoy the show here tonight, make certain that you tell your friends, family, significant others, and any of those social media people that you want to share it with out there, because I know you've got a lot of great connections, and they can always come back and listen to the show in the archives. All they do is use the same link to get to it as you used to come into the show tonight. And there's a couple of other places that they can find the archive shows. One of them is on my website at jessieannnicholsgeorge1, that's the number 1.com. That's at the bottom of our show description, which you'll see that there. Also, they can go to facebook.com/activatingcompassion/notes, and all of the archive shows are kept there as well. So lots of great options for them to find it here. Now, as some of you know that have listened to the show before, I like to delve into a book every week called The 72 Names of God, Technology for the Soul. It's put out by Yehuda Berg. And I love Yehuda's work just because, like the way I present my work, he presents it in everyday terms, everyday languages. He takes those bigger concepts and brings them into those everyday language. And what I like to do is to just randomly open into the book, because it's so much fun to do that, because it seems like the message is always appropriate, and just to see what our message is. And then this message, by the way, does get posted on my website in the Main Street Universe section, on my page in the Main Street Universe section. And so you can always go back and read this anytime during the week. I will put this up usually within 24 hours of the show. It'll be available there for you to read. And let's see what we've got here tonight. And I've opened up to the name of Parent Teacher, Not Preacher. And the message that he has that goes with this is, the greatest act we can perform in the physical world is helping another human being discover the radiance of light. That is the true purpose of being a parent. And the insight that he provides with this is, when we share teachings and tools of Kabbalah with our children, amazing light is revealed in our own lives, in the lives of our family, and throughout the world. Although we participate in bringing our children into the world, we should remember that they are not ours, but are gifts given to us by the Creator in order to give us a chance to share, grow, and become kinder and more tolerant people. Our children give us an opportunity to be the light and to spread the light. In short, we need to become wise teachers, not loud preachers. Instead of trying to preach the truth or legislate wisdom, enlightened people know that they must live the truth. A person who has been touched by the light innately knows that he or she must become the embodiment of its power. Therefore, like candles, we should allow the radiance of our thoughts and deeds to warm and enlighten our children. In this way, the changes in our own lives become examples and inspirations for them to follow. And the meditation that he gives with this is, desire to lovingly, respectfully, and selflessly share this wisdom with your children. The preacher in you is silenced. The teacher in you shines through in all your actions. And this is such a big thing, because children are not just our biological children. Sometimes people come into our lives, for example, those of you who are light workers and you have a client base, those clients in many ways are your children as well. And it's so important that if you want somebody to really listen to you, if you really want to make that impact in their lives, you need to be walking the talk. You need to really be willing to do what you're asking anybody to do. And that's a very, very important thing. And that's a great way, too, when you're trying to pick somebody to work with and to select them as a person that's going to guide you along the way. Because if they're willing to walk their talk, if they're doing and have done things that they're asking you to do, then that's a person who's real. They're genuine. They're meeting their message. And the people that are doing a lot of talking, but they're not doing any of that work, those are probably not the people you want to be working with. But it's just kind of a good guideline. So think about that. You know, when you're asking people to do things, if you're asking somebody to be patient with you, are you being patient with them? Those types of concepts to think about. Now, our topic tonight is related to living with PTSD. And PTSD is something that has been long associated with war veterans and military personnel, particularly those that have served in various special forces capacity. They have oftentimes left as one person and returned as someone else completely different. It used to be that only a few would return dealing with a high level of trauma, and yet these days it is rated more around 75% returning with trauma versus 25% from previous times. And if you missed last week's show, I encourage you to go back and listen to that in the archives, because I talked a little bit about some of the things that influence those numbers and why they've changed so much from, say, World War I or World War II to the wars that we've been fighting in more recent times. And I can think of many reasons. Again, as I've discussed last week, I covered some of those, for that to happen and for there to be such a strong difference in, for example, family dynamics, loyalty in relationships, and even the ability to trust what one's own government is doing or not doing for those that are serving. However, these days, PTSD is not just reserved for those that go to war. This term is actually applied to a wide variety of traumas, including abuse, accidents, and even things such as going long periods of time without work, which is something that we have seen more in the last 3 to 5 years. There is many more facets to this than we have acknowledged in the past. And dealing with PTSD is also not restricted to just the person that has it, but we are also seeing those that are spouses and caretakers of people with PTSD, our counselors, our light workers, and people that are experiencing more of a strain, a drain, and a struggle. It has become harder for those in the supportive position to provide what would have been able to be given many years ago. And it is not just being there, which most of them are happy to do, but being there after working, say, 1 to 3 jobs or managing their own lives and children and many other things. The responsibilities have increased in life in general, and many are already burned out by the time they get to that supportive role. So energetically, we also know that stress can perpetuate stress, and living under constant tension makes it hard to rejuvenate and reestablish balance. Wanda Sanchez and Shelly help others learn more about working through PTSD as both the person with it and as someone in the life of someone dealing with it. And it affects multiple people, not just the person with the struggle. So both have dealt with their own aspects of it, and now they're helping other people as well through educating others how to work with this ever-growing, challenging facet of life. A couple of questions for you to think about before we go to break here. What are your experiences with PTSD? What are your challenges or solutions that you have found useful in dealing with this? And how can we bring greater peace within to both the person dealing with it and those in their life supporting them through it? How have you healed trauma and stress in your life? This week, our guests focus on a component of compassion that is related to the aspect in my books known as loving self. And with this aspect, it's important that whether we are dealing with trauma and stress or whether we are helping someone else through it, that we are taking time to restore and replenish ourselves. And it is easy to keep giving and forget to give to ourselves. We all need to take time to be kind with ourselves, to be loving with ourselves, and to do what I refer to as loving you all throughout your day in multiple ways. This can be taking 5 minutes of peace and quiet, going for a walk, exercising, fixing a healthy meal, clearing your mind before falling asleep at night. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. It just has to be doing little things for yourself. It can even be as simple as taking a few seconds to tell yourself something positive, which is a great thing to do at the beginning of the day, the end of the day, and throughout your day. So I'm going to take a short break, and when we return, I will have Wanda Sanchez and Shelly with us. They will be sharing the work that they do with PTSD, both with the person that is dealing with it and those that are trying to help them through it. The song I've got for you tonight is called Waves. It's by Claire Hedin. And again, if you missed the show that we did with Claire Hedin, it's the last show of 2012 on Activating Compassion. And you can also look up her work at www.clairehedin.com. That's CLAREHEDIN.com. We'll be back in a few minutes.
thought the waiting was over, thought the search was done, thought that I had found in you, that special one. Well, seems I was mistaken, and it seems that I have yet to find someone with a heart in their soul and a soul in their mind.
Welcome back. You are listening to Activating Compassion in the Midnight Hour. My name is Jessie Ann Nichols George, and I'm your hostess this evening. You were just listening to a song called Waves, which is by Claire Hedin. Again, you can look up more of her work at clairehedin.com, which is CLAREHEDIN.com. And you can also catch the show that we did with her on the archives, which was at the very end of December last year. And I'd like to go ahead and bring on my guests tonight. There's two of them with us tonight, which is Wanda Sanchez and Shelly Beach. And what we're doing here is this is the second show of a three-part series on PTSD and dealing with stress and trauma. And Wanda used to be the executive producer of one of the nation's top talk shows, working with top political leaders, Hollywood personalities, New York Times best-selling authors, and top-ranked cultural analyst. In addition to her experience in television producing, she is also the founder and president of her own publicity firm, representing authors and speakers. Shelly has authored 8 books, including The Silent Seduction of Self-Talk, and she has written with a Pulitzer Prize finalist and New York Times best-selling authors, and provides writing and consulting services for a producer of a Lifetime reality TV series. She is the co-founder of 2 writers' conferences and an adjunct professor for Cornerstone University. Shelly is also an expert consultant on caring.com, and that's the Internet's most frequently consulted site for caregiving issues, receiving about 2 million hits per month, which is pretty intense, pretty major stuff there. And they are both sexual abuse survivors. Now, Wanda and Shelly speak to medical and mental health professionals in conferences, seminars, and to women in prison. And you can find out more about their work at ptsdperspectives.org. And also, we're going to be getting into a little bit, too, because they have co-authored a book called The Truth About Trauma, and we're also going to be talking about that a little bit. So let me get their mic opened up. Shelly and Wanda, thank you so much for being here tonight, and welcome to Activating Compassion in the Midnight Hour.
Thank you, Jessie. Thank you so much for having us tonight.
We're very glad to be here.
It's absolutely appreciated you giving us your time and being here, because I know you're on the East Coast, and we do have some East Coast listeners that are up late with us, and but I know it's late there, so I definitely appreciate it. And what I'd like to do is to start off by having the two of you both share some background of your experiences and what brought you into this work, and how did you find each other?
Well, this is Shelly, and I'll begin a little bit with my story about my introduction to trauma. I was raised in a family where the thought of trauma didn't really cross my mind. As a child, I had a pretty protected life, growing up in a Midwestern town and in a kind of a middle-class family. But when I was 19 years old, one night coming home after a date with the man who would eventually become my husband, I got into bed, and that night a serial rapist, the most prolific serial rapist in a tri-state area, crawled in through my bedroom window and attacked me in my bed. And that night, a lot of things about my life changed. I didn't understand the word trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder at that time in my life. Wanda always has to remind me how old I am. I'm 57 or 58, somewhere around in there. And at the time, to understand PTSD, I just knew that I didn't think and react and respond to life the same way after that. My parents didn't encourage talking about it. They didn't encourage counseling. They thought that it would be best for me simply to not talk about it. And so I was encouraged just simply not to share it with anybody, not to talk about it, and that really wasn't a good path for me. I struggled with a lot of nightmares, a lot of flashbacks, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety attacks for a number of years. As I said, I was 19 at the time. I got married very soon after that, and there were some implications for my marriage early on. And but I found that talking about it was really very important to me, and I began to do that about 3 years later. So one of the ways that I took back my life was to begin talking about what happened to me, and moving through a stage of forgiving the man who attacked me was very important for me too, not releasing him from consequences, but to free me and to move forward. Forgiveness was important. And my daughter was actually sexually molested as well by a close family friend, and we had to deal with some trauma and PTSD issues later with her when she went and served in the tsunami in Indonesia. And that was really the first time that I heard the word trauma and PTSD, and began to look for answers to what treatment might look like. And it was right about that time that kind of God introduced me to someone named Wanda Sanchez, but I'll let her pick up the story there.
Well, as you said, I produce a radio program. Although I live in Grand Rapids, I produce a show in San Francisco. I've been doing that for a lot of years, and I was contacted by a friend of mine who's a producer and a radio host in another state. And she said, you have got to have this woman on who wrote this book called The Silent Seduction of Self-Talk. She said, it's fabulous, and you need to have her on. She's great on the air. So I said, okay, and then I invited Shelly to come on the show. It was a hit with our listeners. It was a caregiving issue, and Shelly is like the best at those. And many people in pretty much everywhere now are involved in a caregiving aspect in some way or another. So it kind of touched the nerve, of everybody. And so we had a lot of response to that show. I called her back, and I planned a series on caregiving issues. And so that was how we met. We had never met face to face. She lived in Grand Rapids then.
That's in Michigan.
Yeah. And I was in the Bay Area. So after the 8 weeks of the miniseries was over, usually that's it for me. I'm done. And so I was surprised when I received an email from her about a week after the series ended. And she said, thank you so much, really nice email. And then she said the words at the end, when are we going to talk? And I was not looking for a friend. And in fact, I was actually in a hiding mode, in a very hermit-like existence at that point. And so my very sweet, kind reaction was, what do we have to talk about? That was my return email. It was just that one line. And me, I would have backed off. I would have been like, uh-oh. But Shelly, thank God, is very, very persistent. And she said, well, I just want to get to know you a little bit. I know nothing about you. And those were the other words that I didn't want to hear. I just want to get to know you. So I was not into being known. I have had friends for years and years. At that point, I had friends for years and years who had never laid their eyes on me, had never seen a picture of me, and the relationships were deep. I mean, they were more than just, little, friends you don't talk to. These are friends I talk to almost every day. We sent gifts to each other. on holidays and for special occasions, and yet they'd never even seen what I look like. I didn't do pictures. So there was a lot of stuff going on with me at that time, so I was not like the willing, person ready to jump into a friendship that I didn't even really understand, a relationship that I didn't even understand what was happening, because I was in the process of being right in the middle of some really, the deepest part of my trauma was happening right then, so, of my PTSD. So Shelly can tell you what led up to the phone call, because soon after I told her when she said, let's, can we talk? I said, sure, okay. I knew I wasn't going to get her off my back, to be honest. And so I said, I will give you 15 minutes like I do my clients. I didn't tell her like I do my clients. I told her I'm really, really busy. She knew that. I had clients and a show and different things. And I said, I will, I have this time frame available, because it was a beginning and an end, and so that was my protection. That was my way of controlling the call. So I woke up the morning of the phone call and signed on to my email to check, because I still had a show to produce that day, or maybe two. But I found in my email box a bunch of songs from Shelly. It was music, a bunch of emails from her. And so I clicked and listened to the songs and was completely caught off guard and freaked out a lot, because the songs were my life story, which she didn't know. I didn't know why she was sending them to me, but I freaked out when I realized what the songs were about. And Shelly can tell you what led up to her sending those particular songs.
I had no reason to get to know a producer. Jesse, you're a producer, and you probably have never had somebody just call and say, hi, I just want to get to know you, and I just want to chat. But I had this nagging voice in my head that said, call Wanda Sanchez, call Wanda Sanchez, call Wanda Sanchez. And it was God basically telling me to call her. And I had an argument with him for a number of weeks saying, I have no reason to call this woman. I was very busy. I had been taking care of parents with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's who were dying for years. I was writing multiple books. I had family issues that were quite compelling for a number of years, and I had lots of reasons not to call Wanda, and I really, didn't need to just jump in and make another friend, but I couldn't ignore this voice that said to call her. So I thought, well, I don't want to make a fool of myself, so if I'm going to call her, I have to have something to talk about. So I work for an organization called Music for the Soul. I thought, well, I'll try to pitch Music for the Soul to Wanda. They write amazing songs on all kinds of issues that people have a hard time talking about. Women with breast cancer, parents with special needs children, the issue of pornography, abuse, suicide, all kinds of things. And I thought, well, I'll go to her Facebook account. I'll see if I can find out anything about her. There was nothing personal on Facebook at all. And there was one little iota of information there, and that was that Wanda had an appreciation for inner city missions. So I picked 3 songs that I thought represented the heart of inner city ministry, inner city missions. I sent her those 3 songs. One was a song called Every Single Tear, that God sees and understands our heartaches, and He, just captures every single tear that we cry. One was a song called Dead Hearts Don't Cry, for women who have experienced sexual abuse and that they're just so emotionally devastated that they just can't even respond emotionally anymore. And then the third song was a song called Renee is 14, about a little girl who comes from a decimated and shattered home, and she heads out when she's 14 years old and hitchhikes from Kansas to California, doing the only thing a little girl could do to support herself. And so those are the 3 songs I sent without any explanation. They were kind of odd songs to send to somebody without even an explanatory email. So that day, Wanda answered the phone, not with a kind hello,
No, it was sort of a, why did you send me those songs?
And I said, well, I thought maybe it'd be kind of cool to tell you a little bit about Music for the Soul and to tell you a little bit about, my friend Steve Seiler, who writes these really cool songs. And I tried to find out a little bit about you, and I went to Facebook. I sent you the song Renee is 14 because I know that you like inner city missions. I found that out on Facebook, and I figured that you probably know a Renee, and if you know a Renee, that you would probably love her. And this tough voice, this angry voice at the other end broke, and Wanda said to me,
I am Renee.
And then for the next 2 hours, she spelled out a story that was every intimate detail of abuse that she'd experienced over her life. And I'd had enough experience with PTSD and trauma. I'd actually had a very good friend who'd stayed with me the week before, whose son had been, he'd experienced trauma, and it was early childhood medical trauma, actually. He had been misdiagnosed and mislabeled all of his life, and he'd gone to a place called intensive trauma therapy that totally changed his life in 5 days of treatment. Alan had been treated and given every kind of therapy possible over and over again, in different settings. And in 5 days, his life had changed at ITT. And so I said to this woman on the phone in California, I'm not in charge of what just happened here, Wanda. I know one thing. I said, God set this up. I know a place called intensive trauma therapy, and I think you need to go there. And so that began this journey between the two of us, and a journey that ended up at intensive trauma therapy, Wanda going for intensive treatment for 9 days. That totally changed her life. And she can tell you about, what life looked like before that and her symptoms and those kinds of things.
Oh, well. Let's just say that when Shelly and I finally connected on the phone, by that time, things had reached the absolute
crisis point.
The crisis point that, I was in really, really bad shape. I didn't know what exactly I was doing anymore. Months prior, actually the prior year had been a year where I unplugged from a lot of people. I really kind of stopped going out at all, and I sat in my beautiful little apartment that I loved and just really kind of stopped doing and stopped hanging out with people. I just stopped being seen, the whole deal. I didn't know that I was spinning control with PTSD. And what happens typically to women my age, which at that point I was in my late 40s, is you hit a wall if you've not processed trauma or PTSD, because it could be, PTSD is a lot of things, and trauma is something else, and but they're all closely related, and some are just as a result of one event. Some trauma, PTSD is, a lot of different traumatic situations or things that someone has been through. So I was, at that point, very extremely suicidal, and it was torture for me in a different way, torment for me in a different way, because I was a woman of great faith who couldn't seem to make it work. I knew, that it was truth and the whole deal, but I couldn't, for me, because I was so wounded and broken, there was no way I could, could do it right until I got fixed, and I just didn't know that.
I think one thing that was so amazing that God did was that I didn't know a lot about trauma, but I knew enough, and I knew where to go to learn more. I had a friend named Jolene, as I said, whose son had been through treatment, and I knew one thing about Wanda. I knew the symptoms of PTSD. I knew that she was suicidal. I knew that she was dissociative. I knew that everything about her made sense. And pretty much I knew what she was thinking or what she wanted to say but couldn't say before she was going to say it. And so we found that we had this kind of synergy together that, was kind of a God-given synergy, that I intuitively could put words to her emotions. And actually, once we got on the phone with therapists, I began speak. There's something called alexithymia that comes to people who have PTSD in really kind of advanced stages, and you lose the ability to speak. You can't put words to. You might be able to speak at work or function at work, but you lose the ability to put your words and your emotions into words, to put your emotions and to be able to function in words. And so I could articulate those things for Wanda. And let me tell you what kind of helped with that a bit. I took care of my mother with Alzheimer's and my father-in-law with Parkinson's and mental illness for more than 12 years, and they were nonverbal. I learned. I was just very intuitive about people with the inability to articulate for themselves. I'd also worked with a lot of students who were self-abusive and cutters and had experienced a lot of things that Wanda had experienced, and so nothing that she could say or could express was going to surprise me, or I hadn't heard it before. So I think it was comforting to you to know that to hear the words that you made sense.
Yes, I hadn't really had anyone tell me that. I had a lot of well-meaning people who were telling me, how to do it right, how to do it better, that I'm not doing certain things, enough of certain things. Everyone had a wives' tale or a solution to it. None of which helped me at all, because again, you can pour water into a broken vessel forever, and it will leak because it can't hold it. So I couldn't hold on to sobriety. I couldn't stay clean. There were many things that that's some of the symptoms of unprocessed PTSD or trauma. You end up with, it's going to come out somehow. And so my things were, self-abuse and drugs primarily. But a big one was my relationship with food as well. So,
but even to talk about the relationship with food too, it wasn't until we met that you began to put the pieces together regarding the fact that your issues with food made sense. You were without food for long periods of time as a child because you were in situations where food wasn't available, or there were people who abused you, who tortured you with food, and it was a reward for for sex. It was deprivation. It was neglect. And so when you have issues around food, when that's your childhood, those things all make sense. So to understand, that was revelatory for you at one point.
I think that food is a really common thing, actually, in my experiences, that people turn to in those self-abusive patterns. It's one of the easiest things for them to turn to, and I think definitely one of the most common things, because it's stuffing down emotions, it's holding different things, it creates excuses for people to treat you a certain way, all kinds of things there. And Shelly, I thought you brought out a really good point about talking about things and that need to talk things out, because there is, as Wanda experienced, this desire to hold everything back. And I know that I've had my fair share of experiences, and it's kind of like, well, where do I go with this, And yes, even with a loving family, you can still build those walls sometimes that it's hard to talk about things. And there's a difference between talking about things and living in the victim space. And
yes.
At least in my opinion, there is. Because there's some people that they just perpetuate being in that victim space, and they continue to live in that victim space of, poor me, I can't do this anymore, I can't do that anymore, all these things. And I'm not saying that some people don't experience a huge amount of trauma on that level, but there is a choice to a certain extent whether we're going to remain in that space or not. And some people that are healing can actually learn to come out and talk about things, or they get that healing through the talking, and they can talk without being in that, remaining in that victim space. And the other point that I thought was so interesting that was brought up, and I think it was Wanda that said it, was the time frame of the late 40s and hitting a wall with things that you haven't dealt with. There, and where you both kind of mentioned that a lot of times these things are happening in our life, and even though we know they're traumatic during the experience, the real trauma doesn't tend to hit until somewhere down the line, from what I'm gathering from you.
That's absolutely true. My stuff, although I started acting out when I was very young, when I was a little girl, I did have symptoms, if anyone knew what it was, but back then, they didn't know. They didn't think about trauma in children, certainly. So, but
one thing that was described to us by one of the therapists that worked with Wanda is that the coping mechanisms that you turn to, such as addictive behaviors, whether it's gambling or sex or drugs or alcohol, for a while those coping mechanisms work, and it's like, a brick is coming out of a wall and you can push it back in and you can push the other one back in, but the older you get, the coping mechanisms begin to fail you, and you have to start shoving those bricks back in the wall faster and faster and faster, like playing that game of whack-a-mole and somebody's turning up the speed. And when you hit your 40s and your 50s, you can't shove those bricks back in the wall fast enough. And the suicide rate increases incrementally for women in their late 40s and their 50s if you don't deal with the trauma itself. And that's the point at which I met Wanda. The coping mechanisms, those abusive behaviors that just, they're not working anymore. And the only thing you've got left is, these suicidal ideations and this depression that is kind of this bottomless pit.
Well, and at that age also, for most people, that big reality is setting in, like, okay, how much of a working life do I have left, and where am I sitting right now? And if I'm not fluent enough with a house paid off or something else and money in the bank, then all the sense of failure comes in on top of that, failure and guilt and other emotions, which pretty much puts it at a point, as you say, that you can't run away from it by then.
Right. Yeah.
Anymore.
Absolutely.
I would love to, because I know this is a big topic, for you to provide some insight on what PTSD really is. And I know that there's some people that are now dropping the D because they don't want to see it as a disease. They just want to see it as a syndrome. I don't know where you stand on that. And to kind of give us an idea, what are some of the causes and the symptoms that go along with this?
Causes? Oh, there are many causes. There are everything from the obvious: child abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, domestic violence. It also can be childbirth, medical trauma. There's many studies that came out just in the last year about people having strokes that are finding a huge amount of them are having PTSD. Spinal surgery, another one, with a huge amount of people coming out with PTSD. Cancer, same thing. And
13% of women going through childbirth. And then the huge issues related to childhood medical trauma. Alan, who is our friend who went through ITT before Wanda went through ITT, there's an entire generation of children who had surgery without anesthesia. And so those children who are now like in their mid-30s are experiencing PTSD.
And they don't understand why.
Alan's issue was that he had an esophageal fistula, and like any child back in the day, they swept him away from mom and put him in an neonatal intensive ICU. He had probably 4 or 5 surgeries before he was 2 or 3 years old. But back, 35 years ago, they did not use anesthesia on babies when they operated on them. So, if you know someone out there who's about 30, 35 years old, and they're struggling with what would look like PTSD, you might want to investigate whether or not they had medical, experiences as a child. But it doesn't even have to be without anesthesia. It just can be. I had a brain lesion in 1999. They thought that I was going to die. It looked like I had brain cancer. It wasn't brain cancer. I lost my ability to see and to walk, and I was profoundly ill. Medical trauma is one of the things that I'm familiar with. So there are all kinds of things related to this that are coming out now. Caregiving.
Caregiving. And I think we just got a drop there on our guest, and I'm sure that they'll be back on the line here in just a moment. But definitely what we're doing here is we're talking with Wanda and Shelly, Wanda Sanchez and Shelly Beach. I'm sure they'll be back in the line in just a minute here. It seems like they got a drop there on their phone line. But one of the things that they were mentioning was some of the causes that come through, and that they were mentioning also about spinal column and cancer and disease being an activating part of this. And what happens is, one of the things I can see with spinal surgery, for example, is that is one of the key energetic areas in our body. So your energy current, as they talk about the Kundalini coming up, for example, from the base of the spine, which oftentimes people, if they've been through other traumas in their root chakra and things like that, comes all the way up and into the head region. So that spinal surgery is actually a very interesting part of, it just goes to show you, even on an energetic level, that's got a strong energetic connection, as does cancer or something that goes completely through the body. And it looks like we've got them back in the phone lines here, so I'm going to get their mic opened up again. Welcome back.
Sorry about that.
We're not sure what happened.
That's okay. I just filled in for a couple of minutes and was talking to you about something I wanted to bring up anyways, which was the aspect of spinal surgery and why that could have such an impact, because on an energetic level, that is the main line for our energy to run through.
Yeah. Well,
on a soul.
I was commenting on the fact that the traumatologists that we consult with give a basic definition that trauma is anything that overwhelms the brain's ability to cope. And it just basically shuts down and freezes, and that memory becomes locked on one side of the brain and it won't process. And that's why things get stuck there. And so it really, that's just a very simplified answer for it. Things become stuck on one side of the brain, and
it's the side of the brain that does not process things. It's the it's not the side of the brain that will take that is the normal function.
That creates there has to be a beginning, middle, and end, and so the right side of the brain, things kind of get stuck there, and it needs to be transferred over to the left side of the brain in order to be given a beginning, middle, and end, in order to be filed within memory in the proper location, which
right.
is why it pings around in there like a pinball.
It's perpetual when it's not processed. It just replays, which is why flashbacks they're not in the past. They are actually happening right now. Whatever that experience is, it's happening right now. So it's like a re-traumatizing.
Wow.
Every time you have a flashback, it's like a re-traumatization.
Right.
And this is really interesting, too, when we look at a lot of different energy and processes where people are working with different affirmations or things like that, trying to clear. And, when I look at these in the flashbacks, it's because that transfer hasn't been made. So whether it's financial trauma that somebody's been through where they lost their house and they lost their car and they ended up on the streets, or whether it is because they've been off at war or because they went through rape situations or abuse as a child or whatever the trigger was for them, surgery. And it gets, the concept of it getting locked in there means that it's remaining in the present. So it's very hard until you unlock it and make that shift to not only release the trauma, but to get your life back into a favorable direction again.
Correct.
That's right.
So it's kind of interesting if we're stuck someplace and things are continually not working out. I think that one of the things we really need to do is look at trauma. Somewhere trauma has been processed.
Exactly, or not processed.
Yes. There's a visual for this that's called the factory metaphor. Generally, there's an event that happens, and the event might be considered like a small package that passes through a factory where the brain processes it, and it comes out the other side a memory. But what happens with trauma is that event kind of turns into this giant box that's too big to pass through the conveyor belt in that factory because of the distress and the stress of the situation. And so that event gets stuck, and it can't pass through and become that memory. And so what you have to actually do with trauma therapy is to create a process where you can break that event down in some way and get it through the factory to turn it into the memory and get it what's called decoded often. So there has to be a way to provide some kind of clarification or understanding or process. The trauma therapy, and there are all kinds of trauma therapy methodologies to do that and modalities to do that. We're like giant fans of the one that Wanda went through because she'd gone for 30 years trying all kinds of other ones that didn't give her much forward momentum. And then she went for 9 days, and pretty much all of her symptoms just totally disappeared. Like on day 3, her nightmares and her flashbacks disappeared. Her rage disappeared. Her obsessive-compulsive disorders are now within normal ranges. Like she used to not be able to deal with spiders. She can kill those on her own now. She still doesn't like them, but all kinds of things that just she couldn't handle before are now they've gone through the factory now, and they've come out in these other packages that she can deal with in life. For instance, well, tell them what's going to happen on Monday to you.
Oh, well, yeah, I have eye surgery on Monday again. It's where they stick needles in my eye, and it's so uncomfortable and so not fun, but I chose that. I actually chose having needles stuck in my eye over having bright lights in my eyes.
Wow.
People think I'm crazy, but bright lights are a huge trigger for me, and it's only this past year that I even found that out. I went for a routine eye exam. They stuck a bright light in my eye, a bright light in my eyes, a bright light in my eyes, and something happened that I didn't expect and I didn't understand, and I immediately, this was 2 years after treatment, after I left intensive trauma therapy, and I did so well for the 2 years until I had my eyes checked.
But compare the way that you processed those bright lights the first time. Of course, you didn't know that bright lights were going to trigger you. So the first time you had that procedure with the bright lights, compare the way that treatment was processed compared to the way that if we stuck bright lights in your eye on Monday, how you would do it.
Well, the first time I went through it, when I walked out of there, I was
Dissociated.
gone. I was dissociated already. I had gone. I'd left the building before I physically left the building. That was one thing. And from that day forward, it went downhill for weeks. I couldn't function. And I keep a planner, a daily planner that is packed full of stuff. And I didn't even know that I stopped writing in my planner. And a couple of months later, when I was past and through that trauma, when I processed it, I went back to look for something that I put in my planner, and there was just blank pages, which is never, they're never there. They're never like that. And the last day that I had put anything in the planner was the day of the eye appointment, that's when it dawned on me, oh my gosh, I think this is way more than what, just lights in the eyes, So I don't know what it is. I still don't know what that is. They think it's a very early trauma that was suffered, because it's not just, bright lights. It's lights shown in my eyes. Since we've started to figure it out, it's just kind of, it is lights of pretty much any kind in my eyes. So.
And if you've seen somebody dissociate, or if you're familiar with that, it's obviously something that happened when Wanda was probably about 4 years old. Because in that moment when that happens, and it can happen in literally with her within 3 seconds.
Yeah,
she's fine, and then you look at her and
I'm gone.
She's like 4 years old. But if this happened on Monday
today, because after that appointment, I was just blown away that what happened to my life in the following weeks. I wasn't doing any of my old behaviors. I wasn't cutting or burning or doing drugs or nothing like that. I wasn't even binging. I was okay, but inside I was falling apart. And I didn't understand why, because I didn't know that I was triggered by lights. When I figured that out, and I started to process the trauma, which I can now do at home because I learned to do it in treatment. I actually had never had to do it before, really. After I left treatment, I just kind of kept doing it every day a little bit, and that was good. That kept things, kind of under control for me, and I could do it the way I was taught. But I had never really been faced with a real humongous trigger until these lights, and I didn't think I was going to be able to do it. But the fact is that, it did. It worked so much so that I had to go back the month after and have the same exact exam, and I was so scared. Knowing that it was a trigger now, I was just afraid, but I went in there and had that appointment, and it went even worse, actually. It went worse than the one before, but I didn't dissociate, and by the time I'm probably exaggerating, it was probably before I got to the elevator, I was fine. I had already processed it all.
Wow.
And so, it couldn't do the same thing to me today that it did the first time. If I'm doing the right things and doing it the right way, then it won't happen, because it's processed trauma now. So it won't trigger me like it did before. None of my old abuse and any of the things that I processed, they don't trigger me anymore. Period. They just don't.
I just have to tell you, because I don't know if it's funny or ironic, but I think that Wanda's former abuse triggers me more than it does her. I went through her treatment with her, which involved me being present with her for something called representation, when, I actually got to see and hear all the elements of her trauma, which was very traumatizing for me. So I really think that she can actually absorb. We were watching television the other night, and we saw something that was very much a depiction of something that happened to her when she was a child. And I turned to her and I said, "Are you being triggered?" And she said, No, I'm okay. And I'm thinking, but I am.
Yeah.
And I think this is such an important thing, because we never know what that trigger is going to be sometimes.
Still here with you, Jessie?
It can be a flower, it can be a light, and I think that sometimes somewhere that's where our mind's locked in, or it's shut down, during that traumatic experience, and that was the one thing that caught its attention. And so I think sometimes that's where that trigger comes from, that then years later you go and it's all of a sudden somewhere in your head it's saying, oh, this is happening again. You know, we're living this. And yet you're not, you know, necessarily totally understanding what all you're living. And it looks like they kind of fell off the radar again there, so I know that they'll be back in our lines in a moment here. Talking tonight with Wanda Sanchez and Shelly Beach in regards to PTSD and traumatic events, and they've been talking about some of the symptoms that are there, and it looks like they're back on the phone lines. And definitely we can have these triggers there that you know, can set us off, and it can be something like a light there. Okay, I think I've got your mic open back up here again, Wanda and Shelly. Are you with me? And I'm not sure that their phone is picking back up again.
Hello?
Are you there? There you are.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was just saying, you know, it could be such a simple thing where, you know, years later it gets triggered like that light, or it could be a flower or color or things like that. And, you know, the brain is probably focused in on that at some point during the trauma. That's what it last saw before it took off and disassociated during the traumatic experience. And then you get that coming at you again, and your brain's going, oh, we're doing this all over again. This isn't good.
Right, exactly. And, you know, smells, sounds, songs, all of those things are big triggers as well. Smell is actually the biggest trigger, apparently. But many, many things can be a trigger.
Mm-hmm. Now, maybe you can explain some things here. I have so many things I want to get to, and my time is, I know, going to be gone before I get to have probably half of these things. But how does someone feel when they have PTSD?
Wow. Wanda, you might be really well served. We actually, in our ebook, we talk specifically about these things, but people with PTSD, I think very often, one thing you feel is you feel shame and you feel guilt. And Wanda, you can address this a little bit.
When it's really bad, you feel nothing. You feel empty. And, you know, at the same time, rage was a part of my my PTSD. I walked around just ready to destroy things, and I did. I destroyed a lot of things. And a lot of times it was to save myself. It was to, in order for me not to hurt myself, I would have to break something or do something else, just to take the focus off of me, because I was always the one that would suffer the most, because I would never, you know, hurt anybody else or do anything to hurt anybody else. With my mouth I would, but not, you know, physically. So I needed a physical outlet, so it would be, you know, rage. And but on the other side of that, there's silence that's very, very deep. There's, you know, numb and distant. For me, I felt trapped in many ways, physically, emotionally, spiritually. You know, I felt trapped where I was. I didn't have hope. I was absolutely without hope. And that was where the rub was, because I was a woman of faith again. And like one of the foundations of my faith is hope, you know. And I couldn't seem to, quote, do it right. And that was what was really making it probably the worst. I felt shame and guilt about that. I thought it was a really bad example, and I was hiding. I was always hiding from people. You know, putting on until I couldn't anymore. I was upwardly mobile professional. I was doing well in my career, and I loved what I was doing, and there was a time when, before I finally ended up going and locking myself up in my apartment, when I would go to, a lot of events, and I could talk about my work anytime. I could talk about work, and because I was really, really good at that. But there came a point in time where even that I couldn't do anymore. I could no longer fake it. I would burst into tears in front of people in appropriate times, and I never did that. So it was just a lot of things. Mostly, though, it was, at the end, it was hopeless. That was
wow.
the most devastating feeling.
And I think that's a big one for a lot of people, and that's very evident for a lot of people today, the sense of losing hope, the sense of such intense fear that they lose hope. And so this is really important. We did, I think, already kind of address why it's so hard for someone to move on who has PTSD, because of this memory that's not a memory yet, that's locked into the brain, trying to get to the left side of the brain. Right. But what about the people that are in the life of somebody who's dealing with PTSD? How can somebody help to create a sense of safety and understanding in the environment, like a spouse, for example, or a significant other, or whoever? How can they support somebody through this?
Well, I'll tell you one thing, that what Shelly did for me was she immediately became an advocate for me. I could not, at the end, put together a sentence. I'm very verbose, and I've always been, a talker, and it's what I kind of do for a living, and so, but at the end, unless I was talking about work, but even then, at the end, I couldn't even do that, and I was pretty much just unable to put together a real sentence. I could say words, and I was forgetting every other word in the sentence. I mean, it was just, I couldn't even think. So,
I think one other thing that was helpful, too, was that I understood PTSD, and I kind of became a student of the issue, and basically said, listen, there's one thing I want you to know. You make sense, Wanda. You're brilliant. You kept yourself alive for 48 years by creating a system of protecting yourself, and the system that you created has kept you alive. So yay for that. Now we're going to create a system of getting you healed, and that people you tried this treatment, you tried that treatment. They weren't trauma treatments. They were treating your symptoms, but they weren't treating your trauma. So now sit down.
Yeah.
And we're going to find the most effective trauma treatment that we can find, and it's time for you to rest here. And so I think one thing was basically by understanding. I tried to understand as best I could what PTSD looked like and what it felt like, and to make her feel safe. The other thing was that I listened without judgment and easy answers. And let me just say something here. We could not possibly have come from more different backgrounds. I mean, this is really kind of funny. I mean, I didn't grow up where I ever saw drugs, where my parents ever drank alcohol. I don't think I ever smoked an entire cigarette. Okay? So this was not my background to jump into a world where people were struggling with addiction. But let me tell you, it was absolutely without judgment and with total understanding and compassion coming into this saying, we are the same. You and I are the same. And when you talked before about victimization, I went to such a place I was such a victim. After my sexual abuse, I became such a messed up person. My book, The Silent Seduction of Self-Talk, was all about that. And that was why I was first on Wanda's show, and I think that's why she first was drawn to me. as a person.
Absolutely.
And so she knew when I jumped in with her that there was no judgment for anything. And there weren't easy answers either for this. There weren't going to be any easy answers. And so I think she felt emotionally safe. She knew that I wasn't just going to come back with some simple answer. She just knew that. And the other thing I told her was, hey, guess what? She's Puerto Rican. I'm white, And it was like, this white woman is not going away. I don't go away. So when she would be in a place of rage, I just went with her.
Yeah.
It was kind of like, if it's going to be ugly, I go to ugly with you. I go to ugly land with you. So
at times, if one of the things that happens is sometimes when someone dissociates, if the family member or friend or advocate needs to kind of check in with them and see where they are, if they're not sure they're still there behind their eyes, then they can do grounding techniques. There's a few grounding techniques that we encourage to just kind of get people to kind of get them back, in their own skin. So some of those things are just like giving them something cold or hot to hold. Asking them to kind of give a date and time. Where are you? What day is it? What time is it? Because that kind of brings them back into the present.
And for instance, when Wanda goes for these eye procedures, at the beginning, we didn't really know whether or not she was going to dissociate or would need to dissociate to get through those eye procedures. So I was ready to help her just do simple math problems because that accesses both sides of the brain. And so to know that, I might be ask her to do a couple multiplication things or whatever, counting by twos or threes or whatever, asking her who the president is or whatever, touching the tips of somebody's fingers, giving them some sensation. Those are some simple grounding techniques. Knowing ways to, to be able to connect to and orient somebody to time and space. Music, those kinds of things. And knowing, being able to look at her and know that she, was drifting away somewhere out of a sense of self-protection. Because when I first met her, before she went for trauma treatment, certain things would trigger her. So, you talked about my first three books. Some of my first three books were books about caregiving, though. And I just want to talk a little bit about family members who are caring for loved ones.
I think this is so important to talk about, too, because it is an important part, and I think sometimes they overdo it. And I wanted to mention, too, that, in creating this space of safety and understanding, the person has to know that they can explode a little bit and not get this huge backlash. That they're supported in getting that emotion out. But that can also be a fine line with somebody getting abusive. It can also be a fine line when somebody has gone through a lot of abuse situations. They tend to pull back and withdraw completely and push people away out of their life, and then they want to come back. And so there's this back and forth dance, too, that seems to happen a lot of times.
Well, I think it's important for family members and spouses to be in counseling of their own, to understand where those boundaries are and to be able to be talking to people who are also advocating for them as well as the person who is undergoing trauma. And at the time that I met Wanda, I had an accountability partner who was a licensed psychologist. I also had a counselor who I was seeing on a regular basis, and my husband and I were in marriage counseling and making sure that there were boundaries around all of this and there was healthy accountability for all of this because it wasn't an easy thing. And there needed to be people there for Wanda. There needed to be people there who were coming around her in this, and that primarily was me at the time. I talk in my books and when I speak about caregivers creating these islands of self-care for themselves, and I talk about basically 4 different areas of self-care for you to be aware of. They're the 4 H's of self-care that I talk about. One of them is head time, that you be sure that there's relational health, so that you're caring for yourself relationally. And so that's one thing you need to be aware of, what's going on in the relationships within your family, with that dynamic, with the person, with the individual that you're caring for, but also what's happening with the overall dynamic of the family and those who are around you. And then I talk about hot tubs. The reason I say that is because when I was caring for my father-in-law with Parkinson's and my mother with Alzheimer's, it's hard to get a break when you're caring for people. And if you had a hot tub, I was coming to your house. I just asked people who were around me, who were people who had some place that I needed to go. In fact, when Wanda first came to visit me for the very first time, she needed a break. And she was, because she's a producer, a radio producer, she wanted a place that didn't have any technology. An example of this hot tub principle was I had a friend who has a house on an island where there's no internet. And so I called them and said, we need a place with no internet access where she can go away and not be bothered by anybody. So that hot tub principle is taking care of yourself physically, getting yourself rest, getting yourself refreshment. Wanda just saw a counselor today who told her she needs to get away and unplug from technology. So the hot tub principle, go borrow somebody's hot tub and take care of yourself. Get yourself rested. That hilarity thing has to do with the spiritual and emotional side. And I say hilarity because there's a place called River City Improv here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's an improvisational theater place. And when we were doing caregiving at its most intense, my husband and I had to get away and go to this improvisational theater place where we could laugh hysterically. And whatever feeds you spiritually and emotionally, you need to be sure you're plugging in. Whatever spiritual elements are the most important to your life, plug into that. And then the Harleys, for caregivers, a lot of times your home is not, it's a place of caregiving. It can be very intense in your home. And so you need to get out of your home. My husband and I have a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. So for us to get out on the bike and get out of our home sometimes is very, very important. So that environmental factor, creating some space for yourself. My daughter had a little tiny house with a hammock in the living room and a little sleeping loft up in her attic. So that would be another place where you could just slip away. So those are some of those creating islands of self-care that you can think in terms of those things.
I'm so glad you brought these up, and I love the terminology hot tubs and hilarity and Harley. And I think that this is so important because it's one of the things that I've seen people who are caretaking do is they get so wrapped up in that caretaking process that they're just not taking care of themselves. And people forget, and they get wrapped up like, well, I've got to do this, I've got to keep going here, this and that, but they need those 5-minute spots. They need those lunches away. They need those breaks specifically to restore themselves, because if you're not restoring yourself when you're in that caretaking position, you're going to lose what you have to give that person. And instead of creating that supportive, open environment, you might just lash out all of a sudden and create another trigger.
I just don't think we have to make it all that complicated. I think we can literally ask people ask all the time, what can I do? And I created this color-coded 3x5 card system for a friend of mine whose husband was dying of cancer, and people were saying all the time, what can I do? Well, she had 4 boys. And I divided the 3x5 cards into colors, representing like her car and her house and her financial needs and her home. And her husband was dying, and I said, listen, Amy, sit down. Your kids need to go to camp. They need to be run to errands. You need a new roof on your house. You need a new porch on your house. You need your tires changed on your car. You need your house maintained. But the most important thing is that you need to be sitting with your husband and just being with him, because he's not going to make it. He's going to be dying in the next year, and you need to be spending time with your kids and your husband. So divide these things into 5 or 6 categories. Write down all the things you need. Hand the cards to someone who's going to be your advocate, who can ask for you. And the next time somebody says, what does Amy need, say, what do? Do you cook? Do you clean? Are you a good car maintenance person? Do you have a hot tub? Do you have a cottage? Do you want to run kids to errands? Because here's my categories. And over the next years, her husband was dying. She had all of those things taken care of. So.
Wow. And I think that's a great suggestion, a great idea of how to deal with that aspect of when we get overwhelmed. And I think especially people in the caretaking mode, they're so used to giving. They've really got to learn how to stop and ask in this process and say, I need help here. I need somebody to coordinate some of these things to get them done.
Here's one thing that I'm really, really good at. I'm really good at asking for things for Wanda. I am her advocate, and will go down kicking and screaming for her. So sometimes it's hard for us to ask for ourselves. If you can find that person who can stand in front of you and be aware of what you need, and who can handle those 3x5 cards for you, or there's actually a website called Lots of Helping Hands, which is really cool, which does it on the computer for you, and be that person who can kind of ask on your behalf. It's a great system, to have somebody who does that advocating for you. It's hard to ask for ourselves.
Right, exactly, and I think that is great if you don't have that ability to speak up and ask for yourself, to find somebody to be that advocate there. I wanted to touch a little bit, too, if you don't mind, on how PTSD is different for children. In other words, how are they affected, for example, by having a parent that's dealing with it? And how do you make that child feel safe and wanted?
Well, Wanda, I think perhaps you had parents who were affected by PTSD.
Yes, and that's a really good question, Jessie. I can speak from the perspective of the child, and I think that if you are a parent who has PTSD and you're seeking treatment and looking for ways to recover from it, hopefully you're aware that you have children that are going to be affected as well. A lot of people don't know they have PTSD. They don't know what it's called. They can't identify it. So that's really a source of frustration and can kind of exacerbate the situation if you're a person filled with rage as well. So for me, I can't. I was really young, so I know that I didn't really have a sense of safety, and that I don't even know really how to answer that question.
And that was a generation that was unaware of the term trauma or PTSD.
Yeah.
They did not have, in fact, and I would say also that my father was probably affected by PTSD looking back now. And certainly my father-in-law, I came to this huge sense of awareness about my father-in-law who at 11 years of age, had to shimmy out on the rafter of a barn and cut his father down from where he'd hung himself, and then carry his father's body into the barn, into the house. At 11 years old, he just got stuck and frozen emotionally at that age. But when he came into my home to live as a 80-year-old man, and I became a caregiver to her, I couldn't figure out why he was so distant emotionally, and it wasn't about 3 years into it that I figured out, oh my word, this is PTSD. This is what trauma looks like in the elderly, and the elderly is struggling with mental illness, with Parkinson's disease as well. But there was no language for that when he was young, or to discuss it, and certainly that generation that grew up during World War II didn't talk about it. I think if you can talk about it with your children and help them understand that you're struggling with something that's difficult, and that how much you love them. I think kids want to know that they're loved and that you're seeking help. And the thing that I think helps most of all is to talk about things openly, and to let them know that this is something you can talk about, and that
and not to be ashamed.
Yes,
that can really take someone out. Shame, because then they don't talk about it.
And then I think that family counseling is an important element of this. I think that PTSD does affect the family. It's not going to be just an individual's issue. It will affect the entire family. And so I would encourage seeking family counseling. And if that child is going to intuitively pick up on whether it's rage or whether it's an addiction issue, or there are OCD issues, or whatever the symptoms might be, they're going to know that they're there, and sense that stress or that anxiety or whatever, and so some family counseling would be great.
Yeah, definitely, because they need to learn how to, understand that this person might not be getting mad at them or reacting because of them, and
yes,
definitely having that awareness that, mom or dad or whoever is having this hard time, and
the child
and
always
this is thing need to do.
Yep.
So I think that definitely that's so important. Now, are there any communication, because we're kind of winding down to the end here. We're just about ready to run out of talk time, or interview time, I should say, here in a few minutes. Are there any communication techniques that are useful that help keep those lines of communication open?
I think that one of the things that helps keep the lines of communication open is to simply, I think, at least for me and for Wanda, for me to be asking her questions.
Check in frequently, don't be afraid to ask. Shelly was unafraid. She, I didn't want to talk, and I wanted to answer via text message or email because I didn't want her to hear my voice. She wouldn't let me do that. She would call me until I picked the phone up.
But he is. I knew at the beginning that this woman was suicidal. She had every which way, upside down and backwards, planned to kill herself. I was in Michigan, she was in California, and one of the first things I told her was, you can't text me. You have to get on the phone and talk to me. I have to hear your voice. And
which was really, really, really something that really kept me, it kept me paying attention. I was wanting to sound okay. So it made me talk to her because I didn't want her showing up at my door, which I knew she would do.
Yeah, I kind of told her from the beginning, but she was a marked woman. I think that understanding that she needs space sometimes. That's hard for me. I'm not a person who likes to give a lot of space. I'm kind of needy. But again, my being in counseling kind of helps me balance out my issues, and so with her issues. But the communication tools of being able to talk as much as possible and to clarify, what are you needing right now and what are you feeling, and I encourage Wanda as much as possible to be processing, using what she's learned at ITT, and being kind of her accountability partner.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
and it's, she's allowed to ask anything she wants to ask, and I usually answer. So it's a really good system.
I think this is great. I think, setting these kind of boundaries and things like that where you kind of learn different things. And I know some of the techniques I use in relationships, for example, can also apply of learning some of the code words that you can create with each other to just say, okay, I'm hitting this space, or I'm hitting uncomfortable. And,
yep.
That can be really valuable, especially if you're out in public. And creating those things so that okay, we need to go home and not remain out in this public space.
Right. Yeah.
So right. I think these are definitely important things, and people can set these things up as they have, what works for them, the terminology that works for them. So I think all of that is great. I want to give you just a couple of minutes here, because one of the things you emailed me right before going on the show, or shortly before the show tonight, was that you've got a book that you've co-authored together, which is called The Truth About Trauma. And I'm going to let you share what you're going to offer with this and what the book is. And we've got, say, roughly around 5 minutes.
Well, we found that when Wanda went for therapy at intensive trauma therapy in Morgantown, West Virginia, that as we engaged people in conversation to take her there, that a lot of people really didn't understand what PTSD was. They didn't understand how people felt. That some of the people of faith around us were questioning why we were making a choice to go there. And so we wanted to write something that was just a starting point for conversation for people, that explained what the symptoms are, how people feel, what kinds of things lead to PTSD, what a simple definition of PTSD is, and give people a starting point. It doesn't take very long to read this little ebook. It's a great starting point. It covers what trauma is. Why doesn't trauma affect everybody the same way? For instance, if we were in a room of 10 people and an event happened that was traumatic, we would all process that differently. Well, why is that the case? Why would Wanda process that differently and might develop a more of a PTSD response to it, and someone else not do that? And there are reasons for that. How do people with PTSD feel? A chapter that deals with faith and how does faith play into it, and why people should care and how they can help. There are resources there. There's stuff from the DSM, which kind of gives the diagnosis and criteria that most counselors and therapists use. We are not counselors and trained therapists, but we do PTSD training for continuing education. We actually train therapists and counselors about what PTSD looks like from the inside out, from the vantage point of people who've experienced it. And then, so this is just kind of that starting point tool for people. If you have someone within the faith community or an employer or a family member who just doesn't get it, they don't understand PTSD, they don't understand trauma, or someone needs a simple tool, we would love for you to have this. You can go to our website at ptsdperspectives.org. We have tons of resources there. We've been blogging about medical research, all kinds of things. And you download this book, this ebook, for free there. And what we also do after you download the book is about every 3 to 4 weeks we send you more free resources. No obligation on your part. For instance, the song that was originally sent to Wanda, Dead Hearts Don't Cry, about 3 weeks ago, we sent that song to all the people who'd already signed up for the ebook. They got a copy of that song, Dead Hearts Don't Cry. We've got some other free resources that are coming out here soon. So it's our privilege to be able to provide that to people because we're so passionate about this issue.
And we're really, the bottom line about our message is that there is hope for people to to come through PTSD and other trauma-related issues, there's hope.
Yes.
And I think that is such a key factor to keep in mind, that there really is hope, that drugs are not always necessary for getting through things, because it's really about the understanding part of things, as you brought up earlier. And it is very easy to find your book right there as people go onto the main page, and that is at the bottom of the show description. They will see it there, www.ptsdperspectives.org. And you really do. You have a wonderful website, some great information on there, and you're just doing, I think, some much-needed, absolutely amazing work. And I feel so blessed that I was able to have you on the show tonight and to have you here and sharing your time and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and your experiences.
Well, thank you so much. We do have a book coming out in the spring that's called Love Letters from the Edge, and that's a book of meditations and devotionals for people who struggle with the issue of PTSD and trauma, and
Primarily women.
Primarily for women, written by Wanda and I, and we're really excited about that. It's getting a lot of attention already, and we're excited about that. And we've got a Facebook page for PTSD Perspectives, and we're just really excited about the number of people that we're able to direct to resources that offer hope.
And it's great. I completely encourage people to go there and just look up what you've got and to grab this book, because, as we well know, it's no longer a small percentage of the population that's dealing with this, and it's a much larger. So whether you're dealing with it yourself, whether you know of somebody that's going through this, or whether you just want to be brushed up in general on how to deal with people with PTSD, go over to PTSD Perspectives and get hold of this great information. And I just want to thank both of you, Wanda and Shelly, for being here tonight with us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. We're humbled and honored.
Thank you very, very much.
We've been talking here tonight with Wanda Sanchez and Shelly Beach, and they've been sharing their work with us on PTSD, and how to work with it, how to help others that are dealing with it, how to take care of yourself when you're the one helping other people with it. And again, you can find out more about their work that they're doing at www.ptsdperspectives.org. And next week on our show, we are going to be having Dr. Linda Berry with us, and she's going to be showing us how to use stress as fuel to power your life and dreams. And that is going to finish out the 3-part series on PTSD. So she's going to take us and show us how to take that stress and make it benefit us in our life, which is going to be, I think, really exciting to listen to. My next set of books, which is based on relationships, again, will be available in the near future. It's just down to getting the publishing process finished on it, so it's coming out very, very soon. I also have several events up at jessieannnicholsgeorge.eventbrite.com. There are many, many events set up still that you can partake in that are going on basically every weekend between now and the end of August. So that's worth checking out there, as well as that is where you can follow the 2013 Compassion Tour and what will be coming up on that, including the Matriarch Gathering, which I'll be speaking at the first weekend in October, which is going to be very, very exciting. If you'd like to find out more about the work I am doing with Compassion, connect with me, check out my blog, purchase products or services that I offer, find ways to connect with me, listen to archived shows or see upcoming shows, watch video tips. You can do all of that on my website at jessieannnicholsgeorge1, that's the number 1.com. And there's a great section there for Main Street Universe where you can follow all of our hosts, catch our upcoming shows, as well as all of our archive shows, and learn a little bit about the people that are behind Main Street Universe and here on our network. And this information is all listed at the bottom of today's show description. My books are available from Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Smashwords.com, so all of those options are there. depending on whether you're looking for an ebook or a paperback version on things. And I do have a monthly special running right now for July. I actually extended my special from June because I had so many people that were wanting to take advantage of it and needed a little more time. So I continued it through. And what I'm offering is a 20-minute session for only $30 and a 10-minute session for only $15. So these are shorter coaching and reading sessions that you can take advantage of. And if you want to take advantage of that, all you need to do is email me at Jessie@JessieAnnNicholsGeorge1, again, that's the number 1.com. And I've also recently created what's called Jessie's Quantum Club, and that's really worth checking out. There's a great new video up on there to learn more about it, what the Quantum Club is, but you can check that out at jessiesquantumclub.eventbrite.com. And that's an exciting thing because maybe you're feeling a little stuck. Maybe you're in that mindset that you're having a hard time staying positive or keeping the faith or keeping that bright outlook, and you just need a little extra boost in your energy field, and that's what it's for. So some people are experiencing some great transformations. I've already, with people I've been working on in the last month, seen them get jobs, seeing things come through for them, seeing their spirits lift, seeing them go from very negative aspects to very positive aspects. So it's exciting work, and you can check that out again more at jessiesquantumclub.eventbrite.com. And I want to mention as well that we have several shows here on Main Street Universe throughout the week. Sunday nights we have Darren Bouquet, who's a reader at Madame Laveau in New Orleans. He's doing spiritual insights. Monday nights we have Kevin Baird walking on the sidewalk with his Horizon Oracle Journeys deck, a deck that he created himself. You can learn more about that deck at templeofgaia.com. Tuesdays we have Inner Wisdom with Mary Phelan. So there are 3 reading shows. So if you're ever looking for a free reading, some insight, those are great shows to go to during the week. And then our flagship show, our main show, is on Wednesday nights, and that is hosted by Daniel, Janice, and co-hosted by Brett. So definitely worth checking out. They have all different types of topics. Sometimes they have guests, really interesting to listen to on those shows. And we have a brand new guest right here on Main Street Universe, or not guest, I should say, host, and that's on Thursdays, and that is Queen Mother Imaku. She discusses her work on her show with Egyptian culture. And then, of course, right here on Friday nights is Activating Compassion in the Midnight Hour. And if you'd like to learn more about our new host, Queen Mother Imaku, you can listen to, she just started last night, so you can catch that in the archives, as well as she was on our flagship show on Wednesday night, so you can go back and listen to the archives there and learn more about her work. She's got a wonderful blend, storyteller, music. She just does a whole world of things, and really you can just feel the peacefulness and the power and everything that comes out in her spirit. So definitely check out her show. It's a little bit different, and some different thoughts and concepts in bringing in that Egyptian culture understanding, and very interesting there. So to wrap things up tonight, this is Jessie Ann Nichols George. I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. I look forward to seeing you back here next week as we delve more into activating compassion. Don't forget that if you've enjoyed my show this evening, or if you've missed any part of it, because we covered a lot of incredible information tonight, go back, listen to it in the archives, share it with others so that they can listen to it in the archives. It's going to be available at this very same link, as well as, again, on my website and through facebook.com/activatingcompassion/notes. All ways you can access those archived shows. And I'm going to leave you tonight with the song Yearning For. It's by Shimshai. It's also called Over and Over. And I just want to say thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you again next week right here on Activating Compassion in the Midnight Hour. May you enjoy the rest of your weekend and have an amazing week.
And if I could see what makes me blind, I would soar to the edge of my mind, and to touch what seems unreal, just to show you the way that I feel. of change inside. And we are in tune with the tune, caught in a balance of sun and moon. Oh, deep inside, the light within, shining to show you it's here to begin. When all I have is all I need, I will soar to the edge of eternity. And we see it eye to eye, one within love to be for the divine. And we're walking hand in hand, caught in the balance of God and man. Your lover, learning to walk just a little bit slower, whispering secrets that you can't keep it. No turning back now, this time we reveal it. One to another, all will discover the essence within the most beautiful lover. Time is still turning, the love is still burning. Deep in your spirit, your heart still yearning for. Yearning for. All the